Hey guys, this is Lawrence of the Ketones and Coffee podcast. Make sure to subscribe down below so you don't miss out on any of this great content. Hey guys, stick around because our guest today is a certified nutritional therapy practitioner and holds a psychology and communications degree from Cal Berkeley. She has a private practice that uses functional nutrition and holistic health that focuses on the root causes of our health challenges. She also has written a book titled Carnivore Cure, the ultimate elimination diet to attain optimal health and heal your body. I'm so excited for this. I'm here with Judy Cho. Judy, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so excited to have you on, and it's always an honor to be, to meet people that's willing to share their story and educate others, especially about overcoming their own struggles.
Right.
And Judy, you talked about sharing, even if it's to one person. I was researching about you, and you said that. I was like, man, I'm the same way because you always chose to share. I love that so much. And how are you, Judy? How's everything going?
I'm good. Thank you. Yeah, so before before I get into a little bit about my story, I'll share that. I am an advocate of
Mhm,
believing that I will always share truths and
mhm,
information that can help even the one individual that maybe carnivore cannot heal or keto cannot heal. And so I'm always searching for truths, for stuff in the science that can help that one person. So there is not one blanket statement of a diet lifestyle that will work for everybody. And so I will challenge things. I know it's not always liked, but I really want people to get to better health. And because I work with people on an individual, very nuanced, specific with tests that we do, I get to see a lot of the, I guess, fringe people, the people that are outliers in the
mhm.
space that the diet, the recommendations online aren't working for. And so I get to see these nuances and I want to share with the community so that we can make wellness for all and that optimal health can be something for everybody. And I will always strive for that.
I love that. I love that. I love that because, obviously we have different bodies, we have different
Absolutely.
biologies in our bodies, and I love that. And you talked about when you had struggled in the past and got better. When you found what worked for you, you made it a mission to tell other people, and you didn't waste time and made it into a book. And I'd like to let people know that the Carnivore Cure, the book, is undoubtedly helping so many people's lives. Highly recommend that book. And if you it's a comprehensive guide into an elimination diet, and if you're already carnivore, this book can still help you fine tune your lifestyle, guys. So let's get into your story.
Yes.
So the journey that got you started for on this path of health is, I want to go way back with you, Judy, and ask your prior relationship with food growing
Yeah.
up. And correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not the one that has the psychology degree here, but correct me if I'm wrong. So much of what we know, and I think it's very important to point out in all of this, is our conditioning, right? I believe if we tell this part of our story, maybe we can get ahead of this and prevent it from uh, you know before it happens, right? Before you got into, you were in the plant-based diet before, and now thriving on a meat-based diet approach. How were you taught about food growing up and your relationship with food back then?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. No one's ever asked me that, so it's actually fascinating, and I think it is an important thing. A long time ago, I really heard about people have different types of parenting, and that will affect your relationship with food too. So the way that I grew up, my parents were always like, we're immigrants and we didn't have a lot of money coming to the States. And so we need to make sure and eat everything on our plate. And so our plate should always be um, everything should be eaten on the plate. And if we didn't, there's other people starving in other countries and things like that. And so I always was forced to eat maybe to the point that I was full, but then I would still eat more. So that type of authoritarian parenting will teaches you that you have to follow a certain way in order to be good enough, right? So I definitely was raised under that. And so I probably taught my hunger hormones and my stomach stretch receptors in my gut to expand more, because that was the way that I would be accepted by my parents and loved, in a sense. And so I probably pushed the limits, and maybe why I likely ate more calories than my body needed at a young age. So I do think that's really important into understanding that. And then the flip side is, if you had parents that were very like, it's up to you, whatever you want to eat, and there's not a lot of structure, then those people also tend to not have a good relationship with food, because it's that all or nothing mentality. Maybe that's part of the authoritarian too, but if you have no boundaries, then there's no kind of boundaries with food. So I think it's such a smart area to think about. How did you grow up with your food? What did your parents say about certain foods? Were certain things off limits? Were certain things bad and certain things good? Was it a requirement to finish all your food on your plate? Were your parents food pushers? These things actually will affect your relationship with food. And then, did you guys emotionally deal with food? So if you had a celebration, was it like, let's all go out for ice cream? Or when we're sad, it's like, let's comfort with ice cream, right? These things absolutely affect our relationship. And as an Asian American, my parents are from Korea. And so the way that they share love is not, hey, I love you. That's not really normal in the Korean culture. It's, hey, have you eaten today? Did you eat enough? Right? Like, that's how they share their love. And so food is a center of a lot of sharing love. And so they want to feed you enough, feed you to the point that you're so full. And that's how they know that they're nourishing you with love. And I tried very hard to explain to my parents what an eating disorder is. And it was very hard for them to comprehend that, wait, but we're trying to show you love with food, but you don't want our food because of an eating, and it's that struggle. So a lot of these things are absolutely important when it comes to your relationship with food.
That's so interesting that you say that, because we associate much of that with happiness. We associate with food with happiness, with that conditioning growing up. When you're crying, you would be given food because, so you would stop crying.
Right.
And we carry that into adulthood. Now, when we're sad, depressed, and lonely, we associate happiness with food. And now we're going to grab food, we're going to grab uh we're gonna eat because we're sad.
Right.
And that's mostly stemming from how we were raised and how we were conditioned growing up. And that's why I love that question so much in the beginning, because I get to see why the events in your life happen. And this way we know
Mhm.
that it's all about how we were raised. And when we tell people this story, now they have a chance to make a change early in their life, right? So I love that answer. And um what and then I understand that you started a plant-based diet. You were in it for 10 years. And can you talk a little bit about that, and how was that experience like?
Yeah. Just going back to what you just said, I think
Mhm.
it's important to talk about these things, because a lot of times we do things without thinking of why we're doing it, or why we finish our food plate, why we pick
Mhm.
certain foods, why we may eat something and then kind of go off the rails.
Mhm.
A lot of times it's just bringing awareness to it. And like you said, then that will allow us to maybe change our habits, because we're like, oh,
Mhm.
I didn't even realize that I was grabbing food when I'm stressed, or I didn't realize that I'm turning to, so on and so forth. So that is really important. I think awareness is really key. And then from there, you can actively try to change things that we're sort of now using as a habit.
Mhm.
In terms of my diet, so as an Asian American, most of my Asian, Korean, Chinese, all of my friends were mostly thin. And I think I was more normal weight compared to the standard American person. But I wanted to be thinner. And so I started this master cleanse diet, which is like an elimination diet of just lemon and maple syrup, and then doing saltwater cleanses. And that doctor, I've always been very inquisitive and wanting to know, just, I don't want to know the diet. I want to know why we're doing this diet. And so I read the doctor's handbook, and the doctor says that meat flesh just rots in your colon and it's not good for you. And so I was like, oh my gosh, this is so true. And it makes a lot of sense to me. And so I tried it. I said, okay, I'm going to just not eat meat for a little bit. And then it kind of extended into 12 years of not eating meat. I lost some weight. I did. I probably like 10 pounds. And so my friends were like, oh my gosh, you're so healthy. You look so good now that you're plant based. And so that started really furthering my, okay, I need to stay plant-based. But the
Mm.
thing is, behind closed doors, I started dealing with an eating disorder where at night that desire to be plant-based,
Mm.
but I wasn't satiated. So I would be in the pantry, I'd started binging. And then I was like, oh no, like if I binge, I'm going to gain the weight back. So now I need to do something to compensate. And anything and everything you could think of in ways to compensate, whether it was restriction, whether it was over exercising, whether it was purging, all of these things, and using laxatives. I did it all for over 10 years. And everyone thought I was so healthy, but in behind closed doors, I was
Mm.
not. And I started struggling with depression, and I started self-isolating, where if I wasn't thin enough because I had over binged the night before and I didn't look good, I wouldn't go out. And so slowly, somebody that used to be like the president of social circles and clubs in high school, and I was very outgoing, in college, I started becoming a recluse. And it was because of my eating disorder that I was starting to hide from people. And it was because I'm not going to show up unless I look good enough, unless I felt good enough. And the more and more I was in my eating disorder, there were more days that I didn't feel good enough than to be there and be present. And so I really believe that my plant-based diet, with, granted, I was eating low fat and that was a mistake in it, but my plant-based diet of low fat, it fueled my eating disorder, and then it made me isolate, and it really affected depression and anxiety. And I really think it took 10 years of my life away.
So, as you talk about it at the end, you were able to tie it back to plant-based diet.
Yeah. Yes, because okay, so um when I had my child, I, like, a lot of my eating habits could no longer be a
Mm.
secret. So I started nursing my oldest son, and he was 6 months at that time. I had to get on antibiotics. I was not sleeping. I was still using habits in terms of, I would binge and then I would have enough supply for my child, but then I would purge because I'm like, I would need to lose the weight that I've gained. And I would be really obsessed as I was still plant-based.
Mhm.
I ended up in the hospital because I took medications. I don't know what happened.
Mm.
Memory wiped out, and I ended up being in a mental hospital because my family couldn't figure
Mm.
out what was wrong with me and what was broken. And I don't even remember it. I remember bits of being in the hospital, but I don't even remember how I got there,
Mm.
what they gave me. But supposedly they gave me antipsychotics and antidepressants, and they told my husband that I was struggling with postpartum depression.
Mm.
Now, normally postpartum depression happens like a month after your baby. It was 6 to 7 months later. So there's a little bit of a gap of that diagnosis. But they told me I should probably go to an eating disorder facility and work on my healing. So I did that. Now I had a son and I had a bigger
Mm.
why than to just be thin. So I focused on that.
Mm.
And in those facilities, they recommended, okay, if you want to be plant-based, we respect that. But there
Mm.
was no such thing as low carb. If you ate low carb, you
Mm.
were eating disordered. So I was forced to try to eat pizza without meat, and then eat cupcakes that were filled with soybean oil and seed oils and a lot of food colorings and a lot of toxic things. But if I
Mm.
didn't eat that, and if I was still triggered, then I was still eating disordered. So I tried
Mm.
my best. I used mindful eating, intuitive eating, and I noticed that I would still fall. Eventually, my plant-based diet, I added a little bit of fat, but still not enough.
Mm.
And I would end up binging again in the purging. And then this time I would get really mad. And I started kind of self-harming because
Mm.
what's wrong with you, Judy? You have a son that needs you and you're still so superficial. You're struggling with binging and
Mm.
purging. What's wrong with you? Right. Like that was the thought that would constantly go in my head. And even with all that intensive therapy, I was still broken.
Mm.
And then my brother actually started a ketogenic diet, and I thought it was crazy that he was sticking a piece of butter into his coffee in the morning. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you're going to have a heart attack. And so I started researching it. And the more research I was doing to prove him wrong, I realized that I was the one that was wrong. And that's when I started getting mad. So
Mm.
while I was, at home with my child, because I was on disability for all of my depression and all of that,
Mhm.
I started looking into the science and really reading on keto. So I decided to do a ketogenic diet. I still was plant-based. So I was plant-based, and now I added a bunch of fat. And I will say that that did help me a lot. So I started adding coconut oil and eating a lot of olive oil and these things like that. And because I was vegetarian or plant-based, I still use butter, but not enough.
Mhm.
Um, and I felt better. But the little bit of carbs that I was still eating on a ketogenic diet, so there was like 20, 30 grams, I would still struggle a bit. Like it was easier than when I was practicing mindful and intuitive eating, but the bit of carbs, the lack of meat, I still struggled. So like every couple months I'd fall through the ketogenic diet. So I would be like,
Mhm.
okay, a Snickers fits my macros. And then that Snickers would end up leading to a binge. And I was so frustrated again, like, okay, I thought I found the diet, the ketogenic diet, it was working, but I'm still
Mhm.
struggling. And then I would have like a week of falling off and, oh, I'm going to start tomorrow. I'm going to start tomorrow. The common thoughts that we all have. And I would get frustrated and I would be mad at myself. And then somebody, a friend of mine online was like, there's this crazy diet called the carnivore diet, and they only eat meat and carbs are not on the table. And I was like, that is psychotic.
Mhm.
And then I looked into Sean Baker and I was just reading about it. And I'm like, you know
Mhm.
what? I'm so desperate. I want to be there for my children. So I'm going to try it. And what ended up being like a week experiment has become like a 5-year stint. And then I've become a
Mm.
complete advocate because it is the first time in my adult life now that I'm not struggling with
Mhm.
any eating disorder behaviors. I am not depressed. I'm not on any antidepressants, no medications.
Mhm.
And what I remember is when I was in the eating disorder facilities, they would tell me, you need to take antidepressants for the rest
Mhm.
of your life. It
Mhm.
sounds like you've had mild depression your whole life. And there's nothing wrong with taking medication. It's like if your arm is broken, you would take some
Mhm.
anti-inflammatory medication. So what's so wrong with that? And I did that. I listened to all of these rules and regulations, and 3 months into taking antidepressants, I was at the highest dose. They were starting to add on these
Mhm.
like bipolar and other types of medications to help with the depression because I wasn't getting fully better. And now that I'm eating a meat only diet on most days, I don't have any of those issues. I
Mhm.
don't have the depressive moments at all. Sure, I have days where I have lower mood, but it's not like when I used to be stuck in bed and I couldn't even get out of
Mhm.
my bed. And that made me really upset
Mhm.
because it was just a dietary change when for 10, 15 years of my life that I gave up, I thought it was me. I was broken.
Yep.
I didn't have enough resiliency. I didn't have enough grit. I didn't
Mhm.
have enough willpower, that I was just so addicted to food and something was broken inside me, when I realized that it was the diet itself that was wrong. And that's how I knew it was the plant-based diet, because I did try the plant-based with high fat. I ate the ketogenic version, and sometimes I even ate a little bit of fish, but it wasn't enough. And it was until that I started eating meat only exclusively that I healed. And granted, I worked on a lot of the mindful mindset and a lot of the working on my own relationship with my people, and just my
Mhm.
relationship with food too, to help with that healing. But I needed to nourish myself with the meat only diet to get my ability and my health back, to
Mhm.
even work on the brain stuff, the mindset stuff.
We'll get to carnivore in a second, and this story
Okay.
is so incredible because first of all, when you were in the facility, that there's so many layers to that because
Right.
there you were talking about that exercise where you had to be okay eating this food and you cannot feel or triggered or guilt,
Right.
and at the end of it they still ask you to be okay with taking antidepressants at the end.
Yeah.
The system is so broken, a lot of people are still suffering, right? And you're expected to take antidepressant the rest of your life.
Yeah.
So
Right.
where do we even start with that?
I mean, so it was interesting. So everybody in there, like every single person was on medication. So there were people that were anorexic, there were people that were anorexic bulimic, there were bulimics, there were people that were over abusing laxatives. There was a lot of different people. And you would think that, everyone thinks that people that have eating disorders are really, really way thin, but that's not true. It's just really the gambit is like everywhere. And it's not just females. Females are higher, but I think men just underreport their eating disorders. Men still do struggle with eating disorders as well,
Mhm.
but everybody in there was on some type of medication. We were all seeing a therapist for, our feelings. And I think that part is really good. Just trying to figure out, why do you turn to food? Why are you coping with food? What is it with food? And then your relationships and so on and so forth. So that stuff is really good. There's group therapy that talks about self-healing and using other forms to cope with life stressors. Those things are good. But we also all saw a psychiatrist. So everyone that was in there was also taking whether it was anti-anxiety medicines,
Mhm.
antipsychotics, antidepressants. We don't really talk about the medications, but when I would talk up with some of the friends I made in there separately, they would tell me all the meds they were on. And some of them were like 23 and they were on antidepressants for like the last 5 to 10 years of their life. And then not only that, but because it wasn't fully working, they've tried at least 7 different varieties to the highest dose that it even is existent. And I didn't know then because I hadn't gone to nutritional therapy and I didn't figure out that it was the food itself, but I knew something was off, that we were all on medications and all different kinds and the highest doses of everything. And we were still struggling. And at that point, I didn't understand. I mean, if you chose not to eat your cupcake or I always bring up the cupcake because that was the one I remember, but there was also cookies, and there was like literally like every meal had a dessert of some type of junk food. And it wasn't like an apple, it was something unhealthy on purpose, because they wanted to challenge you. And so if you didn't eat your meal, and if there were a certain amount of meals that you didn't eat, then you would have to be literally locked in a room by yourself, and you were forced to drink an Ensure drink. And those Ensure drinks has like a laundry list of items of artificial ingredients, and it has soybean oil, it has like crappy sugars and all these things, because their hope was that you wouldn't keel over and there was enough nutrients in that meal replacement drink to sustain you. And then long term, if you didn't even eat the Ensure, they would put you in an elevated state of care where you would have to be hospitalized. So that's the system. But there were educations of like what portions you should be eating, but it followed the standard American diet. So 40% carbs, 40% protein, and then very little fat. And they were teaching us to eat. I was there for 10 hours a day, and we were fed breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and then 2 snacks. And then we were supposed to have a snack at home. It was required. So we were supposed to eat 6 times a day. And granted, again, we're eating a lot of sugar on top of that.
Which probably makes it worse.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. This whole thing, everything that happened to you is bittersweet for me.
Yes.
Because it started this journey for you. If this didn't happen to you, we don't have Carnivore Cure right now.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
We're not helping people today. We're not sharing this incredible story to people, and people will still probably be suffering. People that now have found carnivore to be the lifestyle, the sustainable lifestyle that they can be on, and not be moody, depressed. They don't have to be on medication anymore, right? And so, yeah, I mean, it's bittersweet. It's bittersweet. Absolutely.
Yeah. So I only recently was sharing about my faith, probably in the last 6 months to a year. And I would say that I used to get really mad at God and be like, why did you give me an eating disorder out of all the addictions out there? I could have been addicted to drugs, alcohol, those things. If you abstain for the rest of your life, as much as it's hard, and I know it's hard, I'm not totally downplaying the difficulty of that, but if you just never touch it again, maybe the desire gets a little bit easier each day. But I can't do that with food. I have to put food in my mouth every single day. And I used to be really angry. And then I studied psychology, but I went into business and management consulting, and I didn't understand why I studied psychology. So I was like, why did I waste my time doing that? And I was actually pre-med in the middle of all of that too. And then in business, I learned about making graphics and presentations, right? So we needed to share like with the C-suite, the corporate teams, of why we need to enhance the business operations in a certain way. And then I just was like, I got to a point where I was really sick with my kids, and I was like, what is the point of my life? And after, when I got sick, and then I became an advocate, and when I was starting carnivore, there was no graphics out there. There was zero. No one was making pyramids and what you should eat in a day. And I thought, well, the ketogenic community has that. Why is there nothing for a carnivore? And so just out of I have time in the day because I'm home with the children, maybe I can start making graphics. And it was literally just for fun. Like there was no, I'm going to make this I really thought I was going back to consulting. And it just took off. It was, people understood it. People understood the graphics. And then I naturally am a writer. That's like I guess my bread and butter, my meat and butter. That's my favorite thing to do, is write. And so with the graphics, I tied in writing, and I learned to read studies through my psychology degree, and then understanding the human psyche and the need of like, now why I get it, why I had a food addiction with food and why we turn to food, and why communities are so important, and how when all of our community members are like, oh, just be a moderator, just eat more snacks. Like, why can't you just celebrate with some birthday cake with us? What's so wrong with that? And how that impacts us, right? A lot of that is psychology. And I felt like this divine intervention of, okay, I get it now. Like, I struggle with the eating disorder. So while I was never super obese, I can understand why some people struggle with food and become obese, and why they're really trying to get better and they can't because they're on the wrong diet or they're yo-yoing, and it's not their fault, but they are misled with what they're supposed to eat. So obviously, if you're eating low fat and eating more sugar, your glucose is going to go up and your insulin's high too. And then you're going to be ravenous because you have no energy source. So the only way to solve that is by eating more. And so no wonder people that are overweight, they're going to end up gaining more and more weight to no fault of their own. And so that, with the writing and the graphics from learning my consulting days, and then the psychology, I feel like I was meant to be where I am and to advocate, because I was really sick. And I had many, many dark days, weeks, years of my life. And there were many days I thought it would be easier just not to wake up. And now that I know that that wasn't me, but the food, and that gets me so upset that I will fight, because I don't want anyone to ever go through what I went through, because it was hard. And I know that if people were to just stick to a whole foods, meat-based diet, that so much healing can come, and our world can heal a lot of the negative and the harm that's out there. And so I will advocate, and I will advocate to the day I die, because I know how much my life has turned around. The best way to explain it is, when I first started carnivore, my husband thought it was crazy. And even a few months in, my husband said, you should really add plants back, because we need fiber, we need this and that. And given a year later, and my husband saw all the dark things I used to do to myself, and what I would go out and go buy all this junk food and binge, he saw the 180-degree change in me. And he's like, if carnivore is what you want to do for the rest of your life, I support you. And that is the power of carnivore, and what he saw in me as a person, and why I will always advocate this way.
I love that. When you started it with, you were so mad at God because of whatever's happening to you, this and that, why food, right? And he's probably saying back, you'll see.
Right.
Everything, I believe it so much. Everything has a reason. And we get into our journey, it starts when we were young, right? Everything that we learned, everything that we picked up, our parents, whatever they said, we picked up. And our habits we picked up. And that happened to you because of a reason.
Right.
Everything that you said just makes sense to me. It's so incredible of how you were able to, because again, like I said, you didn't waste time. You get on social, you shared everything that you shared. People resonated with it, and now you have a book that's helping a lot of people. And now what was the goal for the book when you started it?
Yeah. So I realized on social media. So again, I never thought I was going to do this. Like, I really was just sharing out of fun. And I went back to nutritional therapy school. I literally went back just to educate myself. It wasn't like, oh, I'm going to make this a career. I had a very lucrative career before. And so I thought I would just learn it from me. And so how I can properly raise my boys to eat well. I'd never wanted them to go through what I went through. And so as I shared, I noticed I was getting the same questions over and over. Like, what about vitamin C? What about fiber? Are we missing certain nutrients? What do we need? How many macros do we need? How often should I eat? And so I just was like, if I write a book, I don't have to repeat myself over and over. And then there will be a resource, because everyone's like, where's the studies? Where's the studies? And so if I just create a book, then people can use that as a resource, not only for their own healing, but when people are questioning them. So there's actually several reasons. One, when people first start this diet, there will inevitably be a time where it will get hard. And when you are not educated in and informed in a way that's a diet that's not the most common belief, and you start doubting the diet, well, it becomes really easy for everyone else around you that doesn't believe in the diet to go, yeah, I told you the diet's crazy. And so it becomes really easy for you to go, okay, yeah, forget the diet. But if you have learned about it and you are aware and you prepare yourself, then you know that even when you're struggling, you know in your mind, like maybe if I just continue on, or maybe if I change macros, or maybe if I add other types of meats, maybe if I do this or that, maybe it'll get better, rather than this diet's not working. Because if you educate yourself enough, there's just unbelievable, undeniable truths about a meat only or meat based diet that should bring healing. And it's the optimal foods that we are intended to eat as humans. And so that is one reason I wrote it. And then the second thing is, as people want studies because they're curious, or their family, friends, or their loved ones want to know the evidence, then they have a resource that they can just explain, well,
That's huge.
the reason why we don't know fiber is this, the reason why we don't know need vitamin C is, well, did you know that the RDA's recommendation of vitamin C is like doubling every 20 years, and there are receptors, glucose receptors, that compete with vitamin C. So maybe we don't need that much vitamin C, and in fact it's because we're eating more glucose or sugar, and that's a band-aid, is to just add more vitamin C. But the reality is maybe we just need to cut the glucose. Like, that's an example I brought up in the book. And if you understand these things, like, knowledge is power, knowledge is how we make change and really improve things. And these big pharma are never going to recommend meat as the ideal diet. I mean, it's a bad business model. And so if we understand this, my hope is that this book can really help people to change and have that arsenal of information and education to motivate them. And it's not just the diet, there's like mindset in there, and there's ways to prepare yourself, because this is not a diet that you should just say, okay, tomorrow I'm motivated, I'm just going to start. And if you have a bunch of junk food in your house, like, that's not an ideal place to start.
Well, the difference with pharma is they're not taking the meds. Here, you're actually carnivore, right? It's actually something that you went through, right? You've seen the effectiveness of it. Like, that's the difference for me. Like, this is something that we should have done years ago to push back, right? But this is amazing. And um most of the people that are coming into carnivore are also sometimes from the keto space, right? And most of them are, regular people like me, and that doesn't understand sometimes how things work. That's why um your book is so great, because now they have references to go to. And like you said, when their friends are asking for evidence, and now here we have evidence. How do you, yeah, now it's not a secret that the gut is so important in your book, because you have it on the second chapter. So why is understanding our gut and how it functions important to learn in the beginning?
Yes. So if you think about everything we do, we fuel our body with the foods that we eat. So for every food we eat, it will either be a friend to our body or it will be a foe. Meaning that if you think about when we break our arm gets inflamed and we have to rest it, right? That's why the body naturally causes inflammation. So your body, the immune system can go to that part of the body and heal with the inflammation, and it just allows you to rest. Well, the food does the same thing. If you constantly eat foods that are irritating the gut or is causing like inflammation in the body, then over time it will degrade the whole digestive system. And we need the digestive system to break down our foods and to allow our bodies to then assimilate the nutrients. So one, if you're eating bad foods, then you're going to make an attack on your immune system from the gut. And then if you don't have good gut health, then you can't break down even good meats or good foods to then digest and absorb it. So I talk through how your digestive process starts when you literally see food, and then you start salivating, how we have digestive enzymes in our mouth, and then all the way down our gut, why the whole digestive process is north to south. So when things start breaking down up top from the eyes, the mouth, from the stomach, and then all the way down to having a bowel movement, if one thing breaks, and it's a very, very fine dance of things to break, if it breaks, then your digestive process breaks down more and more, and then you're not going to be able to absorb nutrients. And then on top of that, if you're eating a lot of anti-nutrients, like foods with a lot of plant-based foods that have a lot of anti-nutrients, toxins within the chemical of the plant, then it will even further break down our digestive process. And the ultimate thing is it's making you not absorb a lot of nutrients, while also making your immune system more hyperactive. And so now you have more inflammation in the gut. And so your stomach, your gut can then have food particles go into your bloodstream, which then can cause autoimmune related issues. And then on top of that, you're not absorbing the nutrients. So you don't have the fuel sources to help fuel your body be really healthy. So I think everything comes down to the gut. Your gut is your like first immune response outside of your like skin's barrier, but your stomach acid in your stomach should allow you to eat certain foods that aren't in the most perfect state. Maybe there's a little bit of bacteria on it, but your stomach acid should be able to kill it off. But if you don't have that, it's going to get into your small intestine, and your small intestine, where you're supposed to be absorbing, instead is going to have trouble with that bacteria, and there will be an adverse bacteria overgrowth, like SIBO, for example. So there's a lot of ways that your gut is truly it's what makes or breaks your body. And it's where all of your food is processed in a way, and digested and assimilated and broken down in a way that then will fuel the rest of your body. So without gut health, I mean, that's where disease starts. And without gut health, you do not have health.
What are the common symptoms of having bad gut health, for example?
Sure. It depends on where. Generally, it's like all the common symptoms that everyone has that they think it's normal. What's normal doesn't mean what's common, it doesn't mean it's normal. So bloat, burping after a meal, indigestion, feeling like you're 4 months pregnant after a meal, constipated, loose stools, all of these are gut imbalances. Again, if just because you burp after a meal doesn't mean, yes, it's normal, or yes, it's common, doesn't mean it's normal. Usually after you eat, you should have no symptoms, none of that stuff, none of the stuff I just mentioned. If you have any of that, it could be maybe you're eating the wrong types of food. So obviously, like if you have some grains or something, it can cause more bloat. If you eat a lot of fibrous foods and your body doesn't like fiber foods, then it can cause more bloat. But in general, if you have, like, the biggest thing is if you eat a meal and you feel indigestion after, you all of a sudden feel worse after you eat rather than you feel better after you eat, you feel bloated now, you're burping, and you feel almost even nauseous. All of these are signs that your gut needs some healing. And it will really depend on the individual as to what is and what part of the gut needs healing.
So if it's, let's say you had to diagnose me, do you start in the gut?
I always do. Always.
So
a
how
lot
do
of
we
people,
start?
yeah. So I start with the symptom burden assessment. And what that really is a lot of people will come to me and say, "Hey, Judy, I have hormone issues. Like I'm losing my hair, my thyroid's imbalanced. What's going on?" I never look at those first. I understand that those are there, but I take there's this like 300 questionnaire that I ask my clients, and we run it through a system, and basically it shows me where a lot of your root cause imbalances are. And oftentimes, whether it's hormone or thyroid related or sugar handling imbalances, it always starts with the gut. There's always something in the questionnaire list, and they will break out the gut into the upper GI, the stomach, gallbladder, or liver, gallbladder, and then the upper GI, which is the stomach and the mouth area. And then there's the small intestine, and then there's the large intestine. And so all of those are connected to the other parts of the body. So oftentimes, for example, if you're not able to digest your meats, then you may not have enough nutrients or raw materials to help you create thyroid, right? Or if you have an imbalance in your liver, well, your liver processes your T4 to convert to T3. Or if you're not absorbing your nutrients, you might be missing iodine. You need iodine to convert T4 to T3. So there's all these little nuances. That questionnaire is a big support for me to really understand where they currently are. And then I have other questionnaires, and I talk with my client to figure out well, what are your symptoms? Like, what are you going through? What have you tried in the past? Have you ever been diagnosed with anything gut related? Have you ever had gut issues growing up? Have you been sensitive to foods? All of these things. Then it's like, the way I view every client is, it's like a master puzzle, and it's just putting all the puzzles and pieces in place. And this is why I think it's so important to spend quality time with clients. It's like, you can't get enough information in 15 minutes that the standard doctors do for you. Like, most of my initial consults are like 2 hours long. And on top of that, it's all that questionnaire. I reviewed it prior, right? So it's a lot of time spent on individuals to get that customized, personalized care, to understand, well, this is what we should probably target first.
What's mostly their reaction within their results?
Yeah, oftentimes when we start with the gut, when people truly heal the gut, there's a lot of improvements. A perfect example is, I had one client, or she's still one of my clients, but thyroid imbalances. She told me she's been taking thyroid medication for 10 years, and she just was eating nose to tail, grass finished meats only. So mostly beef. She was I distinctly remember she was eating like 1 ounce of like liver, 1 ounce of kidney, 1 ounce of thymus, and all the different things. Cause she's a very perfectionist type of person. And she's like, I just don't feel well. And so finally 8 months or 6 months, 6 to 8 months into her carnivore journey, she started working with me. And so we had her do the symptom burden, and she had a little bit of gut support she definitely needed, but her fatty acids was what was really imbalanced. And she was eating no fish, no omega-3s. And so I had her you have to either eat 3 to 4 servings of fatty fish every week, or you need to get on omega-3 supplements. And so she did that. And slowly, as she was doing my gut protocol, and it was customized to her, and then the fish oil, or I think she was eating mostly salmon roe, which is salmon, the eggs. And as she did that, she started healing. She got off all of her thyroid medications and a lot of the things. And she no longer ate grass finished only. She no longer was eating beef. She was limiting a lot of the organs because of some of the other markers from our hair mineral test. And she was healing. She ended up hitting a wall because she had other root cause imbalances, but she definitely healed a lot from a meat only diet. And one of the powers, I think, of a carnivore diet is that if you allow the immune system to rest and not be imbalanced by your foods, then you can figure out if you have other illnesses in your body. So for her, for example, she was struggling with mold and none of us knew. So she first thought, maybe it's the hormones, maybe it's the thyroid, maybe I'm low in this, or maybe I'm low in DHEA, and maybe I need to supplement that. And as I supported her through the process of healing her gut and balancing the fatty acids, and again, this is all tested, she was better, but she was still plateauing a little bit. And so there was just something that I was researching, some chronic inflammatory response syndrome or chronic fatigue syndrome. And she tested positive for mold. And so now we are focusing on that mold protocol. But had we not fine-tuned her diet, she would have always been spinning her wheels on, maybe it's the corn, maybe it's the grain, maybe it's this, maybe it's that, right? But if you just let the meat or let the food not be a question, you can actually get to further root cause healing as to maybe there's something else, and we know for sure it's not food.
So it's highly recommended to get on the carnivore diet first, and then that's when you find out what else is you know,
Imbalance.
Suffering from imbalance.
Yes. So if you eat carnivore for 6 months to a year, and let's say you still have loose stools, first of all, you should be doing like a gut test at that point for sure. Because if you have loose stools 6 months into a carnivore diet, something's off. And then from there, let's say you take some gut supports, like the standard digestive enzymes, probiotics, that type of stuff, and you're still not getting better, there's probably something else. And if you're honest that you're eating like a meat only diet and you still have these issues, most likely you might have a parasite, you might be struggling with toxins, you might have mold. And that's where it's really ideal to test other things. But you will never get there if you're eating foods, because I will always hear people go, maybe it's the dairy, maybe it's the corn, maybe it's the bread, maybe it's the vegetable, right? It's like, but if you remove all those options from the very beginning, you can really get to root cause healing. And that's why I say I focus on root cause healing. It's we have to understand why people are low in estrogen or progesterone or testosterone, or why their thyroid's imbalanced. It's not just, well, now that we know that you're low there, let's take some medication or supplements. No, it's why are you low? And you have to get to that root cause to get to true healing.
Man, because there's a lot there.
Yeah.
First of all, you you have to really wanna jump into carnivore first, right?
Yes.
So, do you recommend them to jump into carnivore right away or get fat adapted first? How do you how do your clients find you?
Yeah. So most of my clients are already carnivore when they see me. One, it's because I'm not super economical to work
Mhm.
with. And that's fair, you know. And it's because I put out so much content. I don't want people that are brand new to carnivore to work with
Mhm.
me because there's a lot of free resources out there. It's more of when you've done it for a while and you're troubleshooting and it's still not working.
Mhm.
That's when I will really be able to support you, because I get into these nuances.
Got it.
And I'm like that detective, right? Figuring out what is not working. But it really depends. When someone is on the standard American diet, or if someone is ketogenic is probably easier to make that switch to carnivore. But I really think it depends on the person's psyche. And what I
Mhm.
mean by that is, as for me as an abstainer, meaning that I do better with just extreme. So like no carbs on the table versus, okay, you could have a little bit of carbs a day. If you are an abstainer personality, we don't tell alcoholics to, okay, you're really healed if you have a little bit of alcohol every day and you could tolerate that, right? We say,
Mhm.
no, you must abstain. So if somebody is a carb addict or a sugar addict or a food addict, carnivore
Yeah.
may be the ideal thing. And to tell somebody that's eating a standard American diet and they're obese or they're unwell or they have metabolic syndrome, to say, okay, so now every week you got to lower your carbs by 50 grams. If they had that type of resolve and that ability to just, okay, I'll just eat 50 grams less, right? If
Mhm.
they had that, they probably wouldn't be
Yeah.
sick, right? It's,
Yeah.
you have to understand the person's psyche in order to give a recommendation. So knowing if somebody's an abstainer, even if they're on the standard American diet, I would probably recommend a full meat only diet, but I would work with them to work on the macros. Oftentimes, because their probably blood sugar is dysregulated and they're going to be hungry often, I'd say eat as often as you'd like. If you need 5 meals, just eat 5 meals. Just get over the sugar cravings, get over the blood sugar imbalance at first, and just eat the meat, eat whatever you want. If you want to eat just jerky all the time, that's fine. Just get the sugar out of the system, and then we can fine tune everything else.
Mhm.
If you're eating ketogenic, you could probably go stricter carnivore and eating mostly just like 2 to 3 meals a day based on your needs. But it will really depend on the person. And if they struggled with disordered eating, if they have metabolic syndrome, right? Like all of these will play into what and how you should approach the diet first.
I love when you said that you're like a root cause detective. I love that because you know what? It's true because you can really find out what's wrong with you through food.
Yeah.
Because we've been talking about it in this podcast for a long time that food, and you talk about it, food is medicine,
Right.
right? We know we can heal through food, and and people have been saying this for a long time. What you eat. What's the word? What's the
You are
saying
what
again?
you eat.
You are what you eat.
Yeah.
It's so true. I could talk to you forever. But again, thank you so much for coming on, Judy. There's a lot
Thank you.
here. I've learned so much from you. Your story. I love hearing your story and researching about your story. It is so awesome, and you're helping a lot of people. I know
Thank
carnivore
you.
is also super simple, but again,
Yes.
it's not that easy, right? You
Right.
have to really want it. And Carnivore Cure is a tool that you can use to understand your body, and it's such a great tool out there for people that maybe are already in carnivore and just want to know why it's working, right?
Right.
So it's a great reference to a lot of people, and love having you on, and thank you so much.
Well, thank you. I really think that people should focus on what will allow them to be consistent long term. For me and my personality, carnivore was the way to go. It's healed so much for me. And I know that I can't just dabble in like 20 grams of carbs. Maybe as I heal, I can try that. But probably like bread and sugary foods are never going to be on the table for me. And that's okay. I've learned to abstain and I've learned to know myself and what works for me. My husband is more of a moderator where if I tell him you can never eat anything but meat for the rest of your life, he will not be okay. He's one of those people that can have like a candy bar and eat it for like 6 months, a little at a time. I'm not wired that way. And so I really think it's not about this is the only way you can eat. This is the only way you can do it. Like we're not the same. Every human being is so different. And I really think that I'd love my message to be that yes, eat an abundance of meat. They are the most nutrient dense. Even if your gut is broken, meat has the most bioavailable forms of nutrition. And that's why it will be the easiest to get assimilated in your gut and in your body and start to heal. But other than that, if you need a little bit of carbs for sanity or you want some veggies because you love them, then find the veggies that work best for you. And I always say go by symptoms. So your gut feels good. You could sleep through the night. Your hair is good. Your mood and hormones are good. Your bowel movements are good. And your mental health is good generally. Then those foods may be working for you. You have to find what will allow you to do this for the next 20, 30, 40 years. And if carnivore is so hard for you where you're struggling every single day, then you may have to just alter a little bit. Maybe it's just adding like a half a cup of steamed broccoli, right? Maybe that's what will allow you to stay more consistent. The goal is consistency because you can do carnivore for 5 days and then go party on the weekends and eat whatever you want. Well, that's not ideal either. So you figure out what works for you and works for you for the long term. And the other thing is just trust your body. If your body, you eat something and you don't feel well, this weekend, my kids went to a birthday party. They had a full cake. I was like, but I just allowed them to eat it and they didn't feel good after. And I was like, yeah, you had a lot of sugar there. I think there was a little bit of food dye and they first had so much energy because of all the sugar. And then later they're like, my stomach doesn't feel good. I'm like, yes, your body does not like that much sugar. And even like the wheat in it. And it's like teaching them these things. And as you follow certain diets, be honest with yourself and what you're able to do and what you're not able to do. But again, just find what's consistent and what makes you feel your best. Just because a doctor or a nutritionist online says you have to eat this does not mean that you have to eat this, right? Stay away from processed foods. Those are really, really the best first step to take. But otherwise, life is about balance and figuring out what makes sense for you, right? Like there's some carnivores that would never give their kids sugar. I want my kids to not have an eating disorder. So I'm very mindful into allowing them to partake in real life, but it's in very small doses. Find what works for you. But again, this is about optimal health and trying to be the healthiest so you can live your longest and enjoy life. And sometimes that comes with finding the balance that works for you.
I love it, Judy. I want my listeners to be able to find you and connect with you. How can they connect with you, Judy?
Yes. So I'm on most social media platforms as Nutrition with Judy, and my book is called Carnivore Cure. I have 2 podcasts as well. One is Nutrition with Judy. I interview a lot of experts and N=1 stories about how meat has healed them, but also just about nutrition and science and things like that. And then on the other podcast, it's Cutting Against the Grain. And that is all about just what goes on in the meat-based communities and having real talk. Sometimes it's heated, but it's enjoyable. And, my mission is to always be open and honest and lead with integrity.
Love it, Judy. We're going to link everything down below so you guys can check that out. Judy Cho, Nutrition with Judy, everybody. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much. Thanks
Thank
for
you,
having
Judy.
me.